Welcome to the Melting Pod, stories about our dysfunctional immigration system and where we go from here. As your co-hosts, we've served inside the federal government for 2 decades and 4 presidents of both parties.
I'm Claire Trickler-McNulty, and I focus on ICE and immigration enforcement.
I'm Amanda Baran, and I work mostly on humanitarian-based immigration and immigrant women's issues.
I'm Doug Rand, and I focus on work-based immigration and U.S. citizenship. Welcome, everybody, to the Melting Pod. Today, we're going to talk about ICE. I don't think it's overstating to say that pretty much everyone in America is thinking about ICE right now, like it or not. But it's also true that very few people understand even the basics about where ICE came from, how we got to where we are, where we're going. I certainly don't. So I'm really excited that today we're going to talk to some experts, not only our own Claire Trickler-McNulty, co-host of the Melting Pod, but also special guest Jason Hauser.
Thanks for having us. It's good to see you all.
Yeah, good to see you too, Jason. I know, Jason, you have a really colorful past, not in a weird way, but in a fun way. So why don't I just turn it over to you? You can hit it.
Amanda, Doug, Claire, thanks for having me. Appreciate the opportunity. I look forward to the conversation. I have both a lot of DHS background and DOD background, but I've also kind of straddled both kind of the political world and in government. I graduated from college from the University of Tennessee in 2002, and I was an environmental science major. I grew up in West Virginia, 5th or 6th generation West Virginian. Was really proud to go to school, wanted to be an environmental lawyer. Wanted to kind of go after environmental injustices that we saw in West Virginia. Then I ended up going back to graduate school, meeting my wife. I worked on the Kerry campaign, worked for the DCCC for a while, the Congressional Campaign Committee in 2006.
Jason, just to bring it, we have a strict no acronyms rule, which you have observed, which is great.
So I worked for the campaign committee for the Democratic Party in 2006, did some fundraising for congressional candidates, while I was also a fellow at the United States Institute for Peace.
The late lamented institute,
yes,
formerly federally funded, formerly abolitional Institute of Peace, which by its very name clearly could not be tolerated by the current administration.
Exactly. So, and after that, I went to be a deputy political director for then Senator Hillary Clinton's campaign in 2008. And then after President Obama won the election, I went to DHS. And then kind of over that period as well, I was commissioned in the Navy Reserves. I had spent some time back then. The intelligence community was putting people through language school. And I had been accepted to go through a pretty intensive language process and then commissioned in the Navy.
Which languages did you learn?
Arabic. In a perfect military fashion, they taught me Arabic, and then they sent me to Afghanistan. So that's how that, they kind of worked there, making absolutely zero sense whatsoever.
God.
But then I worked in the Obama administration, a lot of counterterrorism issues, and worked at Customs and Border Protection and DHS's Intel office. I went to Afghanistan in 2015. I came back. My son had been born the previous year.
While you were abroad?
Yep. Well, right before I left. Before I left. He was 2 months old. I came back and took a job, and this is timely as well. And when you see my DOD background, I was hired at United States Cyber Command to be the foreign engagement lead for Israel. So spent 2 or 3 years there. And then Biden won. I assumed when I put my name in to come back into the administration that it'll probably be back to CBP or Customs and Border. And then they offered me the job to work, colleague to colleague with Claire at ICE. And, it was always my nature, is I think from my little background that I give you here, is if you're going to go somewhere, you need to go where you can make a difference. And I also, like others, always believe that the best place to force change or try to force change is at the most basic operational levels. And I was really excited to take the job and was happy to be there for a couple of years.
Great. And just for our listeners who aren't hardcore political appointees, what does a chief of staff do? You were the chief of staff of ICE.
Man, that's a great question. You can see Claire's already smiling. Chief of staff, traditionally, like in the military, would have, admin control, management control over staffing, personnel, strategic resourcing for, IT infrastructure, not so much in the tactical, the day-to-day operations. I mean, that's really, managing the different directorates, messaging, congressional outreach, public affairs, those sort of things. But at a place like ICE and the challenges we were stepping into, you can get really pulled a lot of different directions. And a lot of my role, I would say, was a lot down and in, deconfliction of operations and resourcing, but a lot of it was up and out. As we were dealing with, 10,000 a day encounters at the border, I would probably say 70 to 80% of my day was coordinating the up and out and responding to the White House, Congress, doing the interagency deconfliction work.
Great. Well, now you all know a little bit more about Jason. Welcome again. So let's get down to, I think, a core question. What is the purpose of ICE? What is the actual purpose? What is the perceived purpose? And just to sort of define our terms for a second, ICE, of course, means Immigration and Customs Enforcement. That's what it stands for. But ICE contains some components that are not necessarily best friends. And I think the one that most people are thinking of when they think of ICE is called ERO, which remind me what that stands for again?
Enforcement and removal operations.
Okay. So when I say what's the purpose of ICE, let's start by clarifying what is the purpose of ERO? What does it do?
I mean, at its basic essence, ERO is supposed to, targeting individuals that have final orders of removal and need case management through their immigration proceedings.
So as a general matter, ERO is the cops who are supposed to find and deport people who are here without permission.
Yep.
Claire, maybe this is a pedantic question, but what's the difference between removal and deportation? Because I hear experts use them and I don't know the difference.
So legally, everybody's in removal proceedings and being removed. But what does being removed means? It means you're deported.
Oh, okay. So removal is the technical term. It means deportation.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
Got it.
But what they are doing is they are arresting people for civil immigration violations and putting people into civil immigration proceedings. They are not doing criminal
And that is
prosecutions, even just to know, even
Yeah.
through HSI, go through DOJ. Right.
DOJ.
HSI brings things to DOJ, and then the assistant U.S. attorney has to decide to prosecute.
Got it. Okay. And so you mentioned HSI. What is HSI? First of all, what does it stand for?
Homeland Security Investigations, and even to where the combat between ERO and HSI, within ICE, ERO officers' badge, their actual law enforcement badge, says ICE.
Mm-hmm.
An HSI officer says HSI. It does not even say
Where's
ICE.
their pride? Yeah. Why is
this
that?
conflict? Some HSI trying to break away. But first, what does HSI do?
HSI is there to investigate cross-border crimes. And, anything that has a border nexus or crosses outside of the country and comes in, that can be anything from human trafficking, child exploitation, drug smuggling, gun trafficking, money laundering, etc. When you talk about cross-border, that is everything from financial crimes to even cybercrime, what goes through the world, the internet, right?
Don't they also return like stolen antiquities? I feel like they take a lot of pride in returning the coin.
That's fun.
Antiquities meaning like
the Elgin marbles or like
old ancient statues and amulets and things like that.
Yeah.
That's right.
They fly around the world and they return them. And it's very nice for them.
Stolen amulet, like Nicolas Cage, National Treasure. To be clear, that's what we're talking about. Is he an HSI agent in that movie?
I think so.
We should check that out. And ERO does not prosecute crimes, period. So it's fascinating as a layperson, I think. This is something that no one takes the time to explain it, in the news or what have you. But when people see images of these, guys in flak jackets and, combat gear, you would assume that they are going after criminals, right? Like they seem like, really well-resourced cops. But what you're saying is HSI are cops in the sense of like, they're like an FBI that focuses on cross-border stuff, right? Whereas ERO is this weird thing that we don't really have many other examples of in American life.
It'd be like the IRS, police, right?
Okay.
Or like traffic cops,
Traffic cops.
Meter
raids.
I think it is confusing because a lot of the words that ICE or ERO officers use to describe how they're going after people are criminal, like what we know as like criminal language, right? Like apprehensions, fugitives, stuff like that. So it does make it really difficult to understand that. But I'm really glad that you clarified that, Claire, because like Doug said, it is really confusing to the layperson when they see someone with all this gear on with guns and they're going after someone, not to think that, maybe there is some sort of crime involved. But like Jason, when we hear people talk about going after criminals, like what exactly does that mean?
Well, that's a question that I get very worked up when people say the term we're going after the worst of the worst, or we're going after criminals. Because 95% of the time, that is not somebody that has been tried, convicted, sentenced, and that is not normally what they mean. These are normally individuals that may have been pulled over for a traffic violation, maybe have, a non-fatal DUI. They have something in their past where they've interacted with law enforcement. And in the political space, things get contorted that somehow that's the worst of the worst, because the individuals that state those things, in my view, they're just trying to convince Americans in a very short soundbite that these people are all criminals, when in actuality, the percentage of those is lower than those of the typical U.S. citizen have ever had a criminal conviction in a court of law.
Right.
And so they kind of spin that to kind of say, we're only going after these public safety threats, when in actuality, they're not, because there is threats. When it comes to drug trafficking and human smuggling, we see it. We see there's more Epsteins out there, and we need organizations like the FBI and HSI going after them. Things are shifting, and people aren't aware that where the priorities are being laid. And when they do finally get it, to your point about who's criminals and who's not, they realize that who they're going after are vibrant members of our communities that make us stronger as a nation.
We didn't really talk about it, but HSI has long not wanted to be associated with ERO. And part of that's, Jason, what you're talking about, because the type of criminal work they did, there was a sense that that was being negatively impacted by being associated with ERO and with ICE. So when you were talking about the branding on the badges, under the first Trump administration, special agents in charge, that's what you call the head of the HSI agents across the country, wrote a letter saying they wanted to break away. They thought that they would be, the mission would be better served as a separate agency.
But they literally tried to secede. They were like, take us out of here.
Take us out. And that was denied. And there was, I think, some strong feelings that had not been an appropriate tactic to put this public letter out there saying they wanted to secede. But the desire remained that they really wanted to break away to focus on the kind of, criminal investigatory work they were doing that they felt,
against the actual worst of the worst, to be clear. And, antiquities smugglers and also like worse smugglers.
Fentanyl, there's certainly child predators, there's important stuff there. Then under Biden, there was a decision not to let HSI fully break away. And Jason was integral in this, but to let them do completely independent branding. So they were allowed to leave the word ICE off of their emails, off of their websites, off of everything. So they could, then communicate with people without that icky ICE.
So kind of a trial separation. There's other things that are going on inside ICE, but for purposes of the rest of this podcast, when we talk about ICE, we're talking about ERO. We're going to be talking about civil enforcement of the immigration laws.
It is so misunderstood. But when ERO arrests somebody who they call a criminal alien or criminal offender, that person would have gone through the state or federal criminal justice system. They would have served their time. So they would have been fully addressed by the criminal justice system, and then they would have been released. And if they were a U.S. citizen, they would just be on the streets. But since they are not a U.S. citizen, they are then potentially eligible for removal. And it is at that point, if we're talking about somebody being a criminal alien, that's when ICE is getting them. So ICE breaks its population up into 3 buckets. Convicted criminals, so people that were convicted, went through the whole process, like I said, state, federal government, and then were released. Pending criminal charges. So these are, again, people that have pending criminal charges in a state, local, or federal system. But that state, local, or federal system has also decided they're safe to be released. So they have released them on bond or their own recognizance, and ICE is arresting them in the middle of that criminal justice process, or people with no criminality who just have immigration violators. So that's the way ICE divides up its population. I just want people to understand that ICE is never putting people through, or ERO is not putting people through criminal proceedings. If somebody is a criminal, it's because they've already gone through the process, they've served their time, et cetera, and ICE is picking them up and then putting them through civil immigration proceedings.
I feel like in people's imaginations, and maybe this is just me, I don't know, I think a lot of people are probably imagining a fourth category, which is fugitives, right? Like someone who committed a crime and is on the lam and is like an urgent public safety threat. So they haven't done their time. How common is that? I feel like we should address it just because that's the stereotype that's being perpetrated.
Very, 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 very few individuals that fit that sort of fugitive that picture of those individuals. But like anyone that is a criminal at that high level, like say someone that is a narcotics trafficker or a member of a large gang that has carried out dozens of murders in their home country, to find that individual takes a lot of time and attention by multiple law enforcement agencies. That's not who this administration currently is prioritizing. And when they talk about their mass arrests and sort of the volume of scale that they're wanting to do.
For a lot of people, they think that criminals are anyone who, came across the border without papers, or anyone who has been here with some sort of status but has let it lapse because now they don't have status. Those people are all criminals, right? Like, because they're violating a law here. And so it does make it a lot easier for the public to kind of go along with this idea that we need to go after all of these people because, oh my gosh, look at all these criminals. From what you're just saying now is that very, very few of the big group of undocumented people who maybe the Trump folks or other right-wing folks would call criminals are actually not. It's a very small percentage.
This number, 14 million, as the number of people in the United States who are undocumented, we should pause for a second because nobody really knows what the number is. On the right wing, you'll hear crazy estimates that are like a multiple of that. But we are actually citing the Pew Research Center, which is the most reputable estimator of the unauthorized population. But when we say 14 million, only 8 million of them are what I think most people are thinking of when they think of someone who's undocumented, someone who has really no protections against deportation whatsoever. 6 million include people with DACA, people with temporary protected status, people who are allowed to be here while their asylum case goes through the system. It's a tough time to be in that 6 million because Trump is trying to convert as many of them as possible into the category of people with no protections against deportation and take people who had nothing to worry about from ICE and turn them into people who have a lot to worry about from ICE. Could you give like the quickest possible overview of how ICE has to prioritize? There's so many people who are here who are technically deportable. ICE cannot deport them all, nor should they. So how does the prioritization work under normal circumstances? And how has Trump 2.0 made it completely insane, even compared to Trump 1.0?
Priorities as sort of a more formal concept in immigration enforcement really started under Obama when they issued the enforcement priorities memo that was then built up in ICE systems. There's a ton of tracking about which priority group you fell into. There was this idea of, we want to go after people with serious criminality, national security risk folks, or recent border crossers. So those were the Obama priorities that built some resentment in ICE. They felt like it was in some ways limiting how they could enforce because there's this like much larger pool of people that could be eligible to be arrested and put in removal proceedings. So Trump comes in, takes off the cuffs, gets rid of the priorities. And again, everybody's on the table who was potentially subject to removal proceedings. It's Trump 1. Then comes the Biden administration. The secretary then reissues enforcement priorities again. These are very similar to the Obama priorities, concerning criminality, national security issues, and then recent border crossers. There's an attempt to shift the culture at ICE, to build those priorities into the systems again. It's just sort of trying to aim, right, the agency at certain populations. So that's what priorities are. Again, Trump 2, no more priorities. Everybody who's removal is a priority again. But the way it really comes into play in traditional ICE work is ICE will target somebody who's an enforcement priority, right, due to criminality, et cetera. When they go arrest them, they encounter other people. Those people may not be priorities. And so does ICE arrest those other people in the house or do they not? And are the priorities, they wouldn't arrest them because those folks probably aren't priorities. And right now, they're going to arrest everybody they come into contact with who could be subject to removal proceedings. And Doug, you should know, ICE has about 7 million people on its non-detained docket. So ICE is tracking 7 million people.
Really? If you had to characterize most of the people on this non-detained docket that are kind of working their way through the immigration court system, the vast majority haven't done any prison time for a crime or even been convicted of a crime, right?
The most recent data that ICE issued was in 2024 under the Biden administration. I think they're still relying on it. Of those 7.3 million, there are about 566 non-citizens with either criminal convictions or pending criminal charges. And so, quick note of that, 400,000-ish had criminal convictions, 200,000 pending, right? So they were charged, but the case didn't come to fruition or not finalized yet or dropped. Huge chunks of those folks are people with traffic offenses. So traffic offenses, are over 100,000 of those.
Wow. Like minor traffic offenses or like?
Yeah, that could be anything. Driving without a license, probably the biggest one of those because a lot of people are not eligible for licenses. Broken taillight.
Wow.
Speeding.
Worst of the worsts.
And then another huge chunk of that, another about 100,000 is immigration offenses. So again, that's people that were charged and convicted of at the border as they came in.
Oh, right.
So if you take out those 200,000, then you'll have 400,000. And then since we know that about a third of it is people with pending charges, like your numbers of people that have the really serious crimes is certainly a much, much smaller number. So some people would say these are not small numbers. I think it depends on your perspective. Like I think on the non-detained docket, there's about 13,000 people with homicide convictions. Those could be people, who entered any time over the last 40, 50 years, right? Maybe they have relief from removal. That's why they haven't gone after them.
But they've done their time, right? It's not like they're fugitives from justice. Or fugitives from justice, the criminal justice system would be after them, not ICE, right?
Oh, yeah, exactly. These people have probably done their time criminally.
Yeah.
But they may have absconded from ICE oversight. So they were supposed to report into ICE.
Right.
Or whatever. And they're no longer reporting in or they disappeared. But those are the people, again, if you were really prioritizing your work, if you were really focused on worst the worst, that's where you'd be putting on.
That's where you go. But what if they're from a country where we can't remove them to?
Well, if you're this administration, you then try to remove them to a third country, right? Which they're doing. But it does certainly make it more complicated and a more lengthy process. But a lot of these folks need to be in that bucket.
Got it.
One of the things that has become, really loud and apparent and clear is how much ERO and ICE in general has been cooperating with other federal law enforcement agencies, but also with state and local law enforcement. So, Jason, I was wondering if you could talk about, how historically have state and local law enforcement cooperated with ICE and how has that changed under Trump 2.0?
Claire may have a different view of this, but the basic ways in which ICE has always cooperated is one with state and local law enforcement is information sharing, is state and locals when they have somebody coming that's being released from custody, calling ICE up and then ICE being able to then pick that individual up pre-release. Also, there's intergovernmental sharing agreements where ICE can contract to utilize their detention facilities. And then also just with service of warrants when it comes to sort of execution of warrants, utilizing local police, sheriffs, et cetera, to execute those warrants. There has been this massive increase. I think the number, Claire, you have to correct me, is of over 1,400 or 1,600 287G agreements that they've been able to expand.
What is 287G? Can you just explain that real quick?
That is where local law enforcement agencies are trained basically to go out and actually execute warrants on the behalf of ICE and do some smattering other information sharing activities. With respect to ICE officers, and that's over my 15 years at DHS, have always said that these agreements and local law enforcement sort of taking on these duties is more show than in the public safety interest. Because one, you then turn local law enforcement away from actually going out and arresting somebody that may be a domestic abuser or a rapist or dealing with school incidents. You're taking local resources away from public safety in the communities. Additionally, it's always been raised that the time and attention and hand-holding that ICE officers have to do, just coordinate these sort of activities. I'll quote a former officer that I worked with, the juice isn't worth the squeeze, that it's more a political show for political purposes. And that's why, in my view, this entire interaction, collaboration, and where ERO specifically interacts with state and local law enforcement needs to be completely overhauled, just because of it is a lot of show that the local sheriff is aligning with, the sort of enforcement agenda.
I think it also makes people in the community afraid to call the cops, aside from all of the, complications on the administrative end of this, folks should be able to rely on police for their public safety needs. And when you complicate that relationship with adding immigration in some way, it really, really dissuades people from calling the police. I think a lot of local law enforcement also don't like it because of that issue. And you saw that come up in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, where the local cops were really upset with what was going on because they said, we built these relationships for years with the community and now it's just being destroyed. And we want to make sure that we're not part of that.
Because of the Chief Bovino, this Carnival Act that went around the country terrifying communities.
And just like for everyone, maybe people who don't know who he is, which I don't know how you couldn't, who is Chief Bovino and where did he come from? And why does he look like the guy from the movie that won the Oscar?
He does. Chief Bovino was a sector chief in the Border Patrol in Southern California. The Chief Bovino I met years ago was not the character in which I saw play out on the streets of Minneapolis. But, over the last 6 to 12 months, there's really been, in my view, 3 different silos of immigration enforcement occurring, like literally on the street in our communities. There's the typical ICE ERO work that is being carried out. That was expanded into sensitive locations and being carried out with collateral arrests and expanded aggressively. Then there was Border Patrol within the border zones of the country, which can go, between 100 and 300 miles, that they were actually executing and going out and doing domestic immigration enforcement.
Is Minneapolis within 300 miles of the Canadian border?
Well, most of the United States, yes. Most of the United States is within this. I think it's like 72%, but of the geographic area. But Chief Bovino was a sector chief that was brought out of Southern California. He was going around and doing these surges, whether that be in Chicago, Minneapolis, Washington, D.C., Los Angeles. I think he was even down in North Carolina when he wanted to go home for Thanksgiving. That's his home state. He then was down in New Orleans. But he was going around and sort of doing the theatrical, blustery media show and doing enforcement around it.
Wait, Jason, what's the third category?
That is the piece that the administration has pulled back, which is like going out and proactively, affirmatively getting the media splash on these punitive measures that, as the numbers have shown now, weren't leading to more arrests. They were actually, based on the chaos and the disruption of staff, it was actually negatively affecting other jurisdictions where staff is being removed and elsewhere. But Bovino was carrying that out. Bovino was actually reporting directly to the White House and outside of sort of the typical command and control of both Border Patrol and CBP and ICE. So there really was, 3 chaotic enforcement activities happening on a lot of these communities at once. And I raise that because, to the point we were getting to about local law enforcement, the distrust has now been rebaked in. When you have the distrust at the local level, local individuals on the street don't know the difference. If your jacket says police, they're not differentiating if that's the city police or the sheriff or the county police, or if it's DEA or the different drug enforcement or alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. And that creates a massive chilling effect in the community between law enforcement and people, but also between the other law enforcement agencies. I mean, think how many hours has been spent in Chicago and the surrounding collar counties for those other agencies to talk about how they're going to handle ICE operations there.
You know what you just made me realize? Is that in terms of actual person hours, Trump has defunded the police.
Doug, I have tried to say this. Not only that, but during the Dove period, they were cutting funding to high-intensity drug trafficking task forces. They were pulling FBI agents and drug enforcement agents away from their criminal investigations and then making them go out and create, security perimeters around civil immigration enforcement, to Claire's point. How in the hell can anybody say that makes us more safe? And what we don't need is our local sheriffs and police and counties to be pulled into civil immigration enforcement. Because, and this is the other thing, we can say all the things about Trump's current border policies and immigration enforcement. He's not tackling this in a way that makes any sense to keep an American safe.
Okay, a related question. We've talked about how ICE has historically, in different ways under different administrations, tried to cooperate with state and local law enforcement. So what is a sanctuary city? Like, what is a sanctuary city in reality? And then what is it in the overheated rhetoric of the right.
When folks use the term sanctuary city, they're claiming that it's a city that just doesn't have cooperation with ICE at any level and probably has laws, or the state has laws that bar interaction on civil immigration enforcement with ICE in any manner. There's different levels of that, whether that's, when someone's about to be released from custody at a state and local detention facility that they call ICE prior. There's also, have information sharing where ICE is able to do investigations to more quickly find somebody, like sharing of license plate information or sharing of other types of state or local data that ICE could use in its investigations. I think the term sanctuary city, it's disruptive. It's not helpful even in the discussion, because even in states that this administration believes that there's non-cooperativeness or sanctuary policies, there's also still the tactical level of communications, the lowest of level of communications that law enforcement agents use that say ERO or HSI is going to go out and serve a warrant in a community, that they will allow that, they will tell that local law enforcement agency, even in the bluest of bluest sanctuary states. That sort of low level communication happens. So those local states aren't getting in the way of ICE operations. They're just saying, ICE, we are not going to be participating in any manner.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
I want to scene set for a second so people, because I don't think people really understand this. The way that ICE normally participates with local communities is through a couple of programs. One is the criminal alien program.
Okay.
So that's where deportation officers are going into jails, prisons, interviewing people who are there and deciding to put them in removal proceedings. So they're doing that. And so some cities known as sanctuary cities don't even allow that. They don't allow them to come into the facilities at all. Then there's what used to be called secure communities, if people remember this, which is really just interoperability. And so that means that anytime somebody's fingerprinted by law enforcement, biometrics are taken, that goes through the FBI system and it also goes to ICE. So ICE knows everybody who's been arrested, right? So they know the front end. They know that they've been brought into custody. They can then decide to put a detainer on somebody saying they want to pick that person up.
What's a detainer?
That's saying, please hold this person. We are interested in interviewing them and determining if they are amenable to removal. So it's saying, hold them for 48 hours after you would release them from your custody. So in a sanctuary city, they're certainly not honoring that detainer. So they're not holding them. They are not likely even telling ICE they're going to release them. So ICE only knows the front ends. They know that they've been arrested, but then they don't know what happens to that person going forward. So they don't really have the ability, unless they are sitting outside that facility, to, arrest people coming out. They then have to go arrest them in the community, right? So they know they got arrested. They can follow them. They can, use their other data systems to find where they are. And then they can, try to target them and arrest them for civil immigration proceedings. They can't arrest them at the jail, which is what happens if you have cooperation between that locality and ICE. So when they're coming out of criminal custody, they immediately just hand them over to ICE.
Okay. So I want to ask a good faith question. Of course, the Trump administration is not making good faith arguments, but what is the good faith argument that I think regular people might be thinking, which is, well, wait a second. If local cops pick up somebody for a DUI and then they're in jail temporarily while their paperwork's being processed or whatever, and it turns out, oh my gosh, they have this history of criminality. They've done some really bad things, armed robbery, I don't know, use your imagination. Why wouldn't we want the local police to call up ICE and cooperate in terms of getting this person into removal proceedings?
So I'll tell you, a lot of Americans think that they should, right? And there's like a long history of considering whether you want to call it the 7 deadly sins or, where there's these very serious crimes, somebody's like murder, rape, et cetera. I think DUI gets a little messier. Mm-hmm. Or you have broad swaths of the public saying, this was such a serious criminal transgression that this person has so violated their ability to stay in the country, right? That yes, we want them gone. So I think there are a lot of people that support that. What are the cons? Like, why wouldn't you do that? Where we started, it's a civil immigration process, right? So the criminal justice system is the one that is seeing them through that criminal process, that is adjudicating them for that murder, rape, whatever it is, sentencing them and deciding if they are safe to be released back into the community. Mm-hmm. And so overlaying civil immigration process on that just sort of interferes with it. And if you want to go even further, obviously a lot of people think that there's systemic racism and problems already existent in the criminal justice system. So immediately just overlaying like one broken system on top of another isn't good. And then to get it where Amanda was going, 4 community policing precepts are you want to have trust within your community, you want to have communication, and we can pretend that deportation and removal is just a civil outcome, right? But this is a massive upheaval for that person, for their family, for their lives. And so it is an extremely high consequence, kind of abutted on to a criminal justice system. So I think that this is a space where I hope we do some really deep thinking about where to go, because I think that the sanctuary city term is too nonspecific. It is, problematic as it is, but we have this like kind of core issues with the way ICE has been conducting its work, the way that it interfaces with policing. And I think communities need to decide like what makes sense for them. Police departments need to decide how they can best work with their community, where they want to put their resources. I think we need more flexibility in the system, but I don't actually think that we have the right answer either on the total sanctuary states or on like Florida, Texas required cooperation at all levels.
Right. Got it.
Claire, how do you think, and Claire and I have debated this for many times, the part that I would overlay that with is if somebody has exhausted their pathways and has went through appeal and has a final order of removal, so they've went through that civil process, and then they're picked up or convicted of a criminal offense, that is where I believe that there is broader consent. There is that consensus that Claire is mentioning, that individual, that removal should not be the consequence of someone committing a DUI, that you take some criminal violation and then you say, oh, because you did that, we're now going to find this civil infraction that will allow us to throw you out of the country. And as Claire said, disrupt your family and put you in most likely in harm's way. But if you have exhausted those pathways to be here, you do have a final order of removal. And then you also have convicted, you've been convicted of some criminal offense, that those individuals could, that is where I believe that there should be some cooperation between other law enforcement agencies and ICE.
I think at the point that you have somebody post-criminal conviction, that's a space where there should be some conversations about what makes sense. I think that where you have somebody pre-trial, where they've not gone through the local criminal justice process, pulling them out and pulling them into the ICE arena is problematic. So I think
let me show you how egregious this has gotten over the last year. There is many cases just because the White House wanted to bump up its arrest numbers to get to that, everybody's probably heard about that 3,000 a day goal, that they were asking states who were individuals, went through the criminal justice system, they were convicted, they were doing time in state prison or in a jail. They would say to that state, they would say, hey, turn him over to ICE. We will take custody of him and book him into ICE custody out of state custody. So they were taking people out of being, serving their time just so they could increase the number of arrests to kind of pump up their volume in court.
One thing that the Trump administration does constantly and grotesquely is take an actual criminal who happens to be from another country and who may have been undocumented and who commits a heinous crime in the United States and say, look, number one, this is what it means to be an immigrant. And number two, this person should have been apprehended by a Democratic president. And so there's blood on their hands. So let's be real. How preventable are these incidents?
A lot of times, state and local law enforcement refer people to ICE, and ICE doesn't show up. That happens a great deal in a lot of, so there's then you could reverse it on you're making say blood is on ICE's hands when they don't show up, but it happens so rare but additionally, if there is somebody that is a recidivist convicted criminal that has a removal order and state and locals don't refer, Jason, 2-time Democratic appointee, would say the state that law enforcement agency should be calling ICE and saying this individual is going to be released in 72 hours. But a lot of times, like it happens every day, ICE doesn't show up and then they're just released. Because, that happens for a smattering of issues. Just one, no one picked up the phone, or two, that referring law enforcement, those agents aren't around that day. That's how, there's just so much probability,
You could just say that it is like community safety and like charging with criminality and assuming that they're safe to go back in the community is the job of the criminal justice system. So all these people that they're parading around, some state federal judge looked at them, said, this is the punishment for your crime. And at the end of that punishment, we've punished you enough, you can go back in the community. And so if we trust in that system for U.S. citizens, we can trust in that system for immigrants, and that those people that should be released are released, and that it is then ICE's job to either coordinate with those, to take those people immediately, or to find them and then put them in removal proceedings. But in terms of, could you prevent it by never letting anybody in? Again, like Jason said, like the criminality rates, I mean, I think I've seen things that said that the criminality rates among ICE and Border Patrol agents are higher than amongst the undocumented population, right? Like the criminality rates of U.S. citizens is higher. Like, it's a fallacy to think that we will have zero immigration. And if you have some immigration, there's going to be a little risk those people will commit a crime. And that's why we have the laws to then say they could be removed.
And I think Americans they had gotten a lesson in the last year of the Trump administration, a lesson that these individuals want to utilize law enforcement, I mean, immigration enforcement, for political opportunism. And a lot of them, they want to hurt people, and they want to do it for reasons of nativism and white nationalism. And the opposition party now needs to stand up and point that out clearly, but also say, we can have public safety and we can have new members of our community too. And we can protect people globally that are in harm's way. And we have to say that over and over and over again.
So this is very mind expanding for me. I've learned so much. I really appreciate it. Yet another one of the umpteen things that I don't think I even remotely understood is the fact that even right now, like if you're an ICE, let's say an ERO, right? If you're a deportation officer, under normal circumstances, like how much of your time is spent in the flak jacket, trying to apprehend somebody versus being at a desk doing case management?
Right. So those DOs are spread out and in the field offices. Some of them are working removals. So they're trying to talk to the consulates and trying to get travel documents and manifest people on planes.
That's a job.
They're not really in the,
right.
That's a job.
Okay.
They're not really in the flak jackets. There's the detention stuff. So they're the ones that are like meeting people that are already in ICE custody and seeing how their case is going. And so
whole other episode, whole other job. Right.
Right. And then there's the non-detained docket folks who are seeing people who are in the community as they're going through this process. Maybe they're checking in the ICE office once a month. That's 7 million people. There's only 60,000 right now in custody. So 60,000 detained, 7 million, interfacing broadly with
living their lives and showing up for appointments and just generally keeping ICE up to date about where they are and what they're doing and where they are in this lengthy due process sequence.
And then you have the CAP officers, the criminal alien program. That's where they're going into the jails and picking people up from the jail, bringing them to ICE custody, or where they're picking up people where somebody honors detainers and taking them. But the people that you're talking about is this smaller group under this umbrella of fugitive operations or FUJOP. So those are normally they're specially trained, but their job is to go out, identify people and arrest them. When I left ICE, there were about 6,000 ERO officers nationwide, right? There were probably, of those 6,000, maybe 1,000 were FUJOPs.
Wait, so in Minneapolis, all the officers that were surged into Minneapolis, were they all fugitive operations or were they from other parts?
They were from other parts, but they were doing FUJOPs. They were doing at-large arrest work, which would not be necessarily their normal.
I always had a percentage calculus. It was a rough order of magnitude for Congress because they'd always ask this question. Yeah. It was always about 80 to 85% of ICE arrests were exactly as Claire described, which was bookends from other law enforcement agencies, with someone that came in for a check-in and you took them into custody. Only about 15% of ICE work was going out, knocking in a door and finding somebody that would have, a fugitive.
Wait, so you're saying like everyone in America, everyone in the world is watching what happened in Minneapolis and what's happened and will happen in other cities. Who are these officers? What is their normal job when it's not now?
They're trained as deportation officers, but somebody that does fugitive operations, there's other training modules that are 3 or 4 weeks that a lot of those, they didn't go to become. And then there's also special response teams, a part of that, which also go to other training that is more of that tactical SWAT team style, work. But the large surge that you saw in Minneapolis was just typical deportation officers being brought out of Houston's field office. They put on their Kevlar and their battle rattle, and they were going out there doing sort of at-large arrests. Also, you have
something,
FBI and Border Patrol.
Right, of course. But you're saying that these deportation officers, sorry, it's just like it's endless, the number of crazy things going on. Most of these deportation officers were working desk jobs, and the most dangerous thing they were doing on a day-to-day basis was like going to the county jail and basically transfer of custody.
Or switching out an ankle monitor that the battery had died.
Yeah, so these people are not trained to go out into the community and make arrests.
And even that, Doug, a lot of the training, a lot of these folks have been at ERO for 15 years. Their training was in in 2010 or 2011.
Right. Like you were saying before, like if it would be like you getting called up to go on a carrier somewhere in the world and you haven't been trained in 15 years.
I'm an intelligence officer targeter in the Navy, and they're like asking me to go fly an F-15. In that case, that's not my job. But like my point is, I mean, they're even taking it a step further. They have Border Patrol agents doing car stops. How many times do you think a Border Patrol agent had done literally, or high speed?
Yeah, it's probably not your best way to get into this country without permission in a high speed car chase.
Yeah, you saw that. Like you look at what happened with Miss Good in Minneapolis. The officer had his gun in his left hand and his personal cell phone in his right, and was firing a weapon with other officers standing behind her. That shows you a lack of training. I mean, it's absurd.
Okay, fugitive operations. So this is probably what people have in mind when they're thinking of what ICE does and what it's for, even though it's a small minority of what ICE does and what it's for. Who are the fugitives? What are they fugitives from?
Yeah, so the fugitive term is not accurate necessarily, right? Some of them are fugitives. So each field office will have a target list for FUJOPs of who they want to go after. Some of those people may have been instructed to report to ICE and they absconded, right? So they are fugitive from sort of the immigration process.
A fugitive from a civil process. Like I didn't pay my parking ticket. I'm a fugitive.
Yes. They're all fugitives from the civil immigration process, right? Or they are, again, somebody where ICE is aware that they had an arrest, a conviction, and they were released from local criminal custody, and ICE was not able to pick them up, or there wasn't the communication to pick them up. So they know they're in the community. They know they've got a criminal conviction. So they're going to go try to find them and arrest them and put them into immigration proceedings. Or they're people that they know are in the community that have a removal order, right? So they went through immigration court, they got a removal order, but they haven't gone home. So now they're a fugitive in the sense that they have not complied with their removal order.
I mean, this is remarkable because I would venture to guess that when most people, I'm not talking like MAGA faithful, like a regular, well-meaning person who listens to the news and is trying to sort out what's going on, when they hear what ICE is and what it's for, they assume, or at least they assumed until recently, until things started happening to U.S. citizens, they assumed that an ICE agent is going after a criminal who is running from the law. After everything you talked about, I have a question. I don't mean this to be facetious. I mean this seriously. Why does any ERO officer need a gun?
Okay. I'll probably land in a spot that is different from some people. I think some do need to be armed because if they're doing that at large enforcement against, say, somebody who has, homicide convictions, is known to be in a, cartel involved or gang involved, right? It is a very dangerous situation for that officer. Then, yeah, maybe they should be armed as they go and do that. But a lot of the encounters and a lot of the work that is done by ERO certainly doesn't need to be done by somebody with a gun, right? Somebody's reporting in to the officer. They're formally coming to the office. They're going to a magnometer before they come and see you. They're just checking in, giving you updates on where they're living, et cetera. Sitting at a desk.
We're basically talking about probation officers.
Yeah, we are. There's probation officers. Or if the person's in custody, right, they're in detention, and then they're like sort of their case manager. Or if they're transferring them from criminal custody directly to ICE custody, again, not persons, been in criminal custody. They're not armed. They've been searched thoroughly before coming to ICE custody.
So we have this image of the SWAT team, tactical agent busting down doors, but like the vast majority of the work is the desk job. Exactly.
Talking to counsel, it's, hey, can we get travel documents for this person on a plane? Putting them on a manifest on a plane. Who's going on the plane? Figuring out transportation logistics.
Logistics.
It's case management and logistics by and large.
So, one of the things I really want to talk about and that I've been hearing people talking about is what does the future hold, right, for ICE? You have this agency that has a lot of people inside who are dedicated to the agenda that the Trump administration has put forward. I'm sure there are dissenters too, but he got a lot of money in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act to hire a ton more people who are very aligned with him. And as we've seen in the news, also don't necessarily get trained or have any sort of background in law enforcement. And, say we do get another shot at being in the administration in 2028, any Democrat is going to be faced with all of these people at an agency that is humongous. And a lot of people are asking, can ICE be reformed or should we abolish ICE? And I would love to hear your thoughts and also Claire's thoughts on that.
There is always going to be the enforcement side of the mission, whether that resides within ICE or that is moved out or there's a reorganization of DHS. Of course, that needs to happen. There's the actual fundamental ways in which ICE goes about its business that I do believe that the American people have a consensus of what is right, what is humane, what is in the best public safety interest. I think the Democratic Party needs to be okay talking about the totality of the system and what we believe is best for Americans, because what this administration done is overstep. They have showed that they can't be trusted with tools of law enforcement. We need to be okay saying that. We also need to be okay saying that we need more immigration to this country, but we need a system or agencies that can support that. Our immigration laws aren't just for Americans. I mean, I get excited. Maybe I'm the last son of a Baptist minister from West Virginia. I get excited about people wanting to come to the United States. You know what I mean? But this sort of antiquated, knuckle-dragging way that this administration thinks that punitiveness and lethality are somehow strategic policy.
Right.
It makes no sense whatsoever.
Right. But you're going to be with that, Jason, you're going to be confronted with an agency full of officers that do not believe in that at all. So I guess just to push a little bit more, how do you deal with that as an incoming administration? What do you do with all of those people who really do not want to be on board with your agenda?
Specifically, I think the pushback on the Homeland Security investigation side is already clearly underway. You can see that happening. Enforcement and removal operations needs to be closer aligned to the actual execution of our immigration laws. The idea that an ERO deportation officer leaves the schoolhouse when he's made an officer, it never has to be retrained. I'm a Navy reservist. I'm retrained all the time in the skill sets in which I serve in the Navy Reserves in. It's recurring. We need recurring training. We need people to be held to both physical standards, understanding of the law. You also need a re-vetting of everyone that has been brought in within this collapsed sort of pipeline, which they brought these in.
Re-vetting for what? Just to be clear. What are the things that, in your view, could make someone not eligible to be an ICE officer anymore?
Doug, I was a part of the reinvestigation of all DHS employees after January 6th in the Biden administration.
Wow.
Task force that was set up for that. There's a large scale of things that we should be looking at. There's basic ones too. There's individuals that have past criminal offenses, have financial issues. I've heard these are rumors that even individuals that were booted out of other federal law enforcement agencies for corruption, for wrongdoing, were then brought in and hired. I mean, there just needs to be a total relook at, but additionally, the structure and the mission, to a lot of the points that Claire's made, need to be relooked at across what deportation officers do. The idea that we need 100,000 detention beds and we're going to go out every month and arrest 37,000 people and 7,000 or 9,000 deportation officers are able to manage that for both care and custody and arrest is absurd. It's an absurd notion. So I am quickly getting into the canoe of those that believe that we need a hard commission style look at DHS as a whole. And I think, I
don't think I'm crazy to say that, Democratic administrations have struggled mightily to get ICE as an institution to comply with all the wonderful policies that we can envision. And so, hypothetical, let's say the political will is there, the policies are ironed out, it's all ready to go. You come in, you've got a leadership position at ICE, even let's say like, in the first month, you're able to clean house and get rid of the real knuckleheads with like obvious criminality or crazy stuff. So you're not back to the status quo, but you're somewhere close to that. Now what? Like, how do you run an agency that's never wanted to be anything other than, packing heat and like going in and busting down doors?
I have a different view of this, and this is the part of ICE that, like, one, ICE needs to accept its mission is just not about removal. Because immediately, an ICE officer only sees things through the lens of arrest and detention. This is a civil immigration process. And also, your job is not just to like arrest and throw people out of the country. So the things that we're concerned about of making sure that we have the right officers carrying out the duties, that they're trained properly, they understand the law, they're handling their job humanely, they have the tools and resources where it's just not their only tool is to arrest them and throw them in the Boone County, Kentucky correction facility. We need more than that. And that is fully changing the view of what ICE is. And that's what I say when you look at permutations of where the mission set of enforcement and removal and management will be, we need all cards on the table. Like, we cannot conform to the DC way of only seeing things through the lens of what is in front of us. We have to realize that the way that we have built DHS is not carrying out its duties in a lot of ways in which Americans believe it should be.
So I agree with Jason that we have to think bigger picture. We have to proportionality in the system. We can't just have removal as the only option. But again, to where I was saying about pulling out some of these jobs from as not being law enforcement officers and hiring in people whose view is that they are case managers, right? So their view is that they want to help somebody work through a process, not, have a gun, arrest somebody, and then take them out of the community, which is really, what enforcement and removal operators see their job as. They're arresting people, detaining them, and then removing them. And so I think you need to build a whole different types of job series, job categories, and the way that the job is performed. And that for a much smaller portion of the population, some of those people with those like very serious criminality, dangerousness, that's where you would have the law enforcement officers going out and arresting them, taking them through this higher level of custody and then removal. But so I just like shrinking that part and then growing a case management part. And probably in an ideal world, you'd have the ability to do this from the ground up. So you're sort of like building something new, putting the pieces together and designing it that way. But that would take a lot of political will and space. And I worry that if we spend too much time moving the chess pieces around about DHS, we lose the political space to like help the long-term undocumented and to do some of those other really important things that we need to do also in the immigration space, because I think reorgs can eat up a lot of bandwidth.
Why shouldn't we abolish ICE, Claire?
Well, I think the agency needs a top to bottom reform. So I would say I think we need to create something new. I don't think we're going to live in a world without any immigration enforcement. So how that enforcement happens, where it happens, is going to have to live somewhere. I think we need to think about a new world order where we have a new way of doing immigration enforcement.
Like, whatever new administration comes in has to have objective standards. Like, those standards were utterly obliterated. There were educational standards. There were training standards. There were not being part of a right-wing hate group standards, right? Like, all those standards, we're going to be applying them. If you want to reapply once you've gotten your college degree or when you're not part of a group that's basically a violent gang, like the Proud Boys or what have you. It's not fair. Like, we can't just do what they did, right? We have to have standards.
I agree. I think we can have high standards and we can make big changes without the kind of really hostile, destructive attitude of this administration.
I mean, I hear what you're saying, and I think that you are such a good government person that you really do believe in good government. And I love that about you. And I'm just in a different place where I think that we have to reimagine everything, right? Like, why can't we imagine something different? That's just where I'm coming from. And I get that, like, the actual doing of it is a lot different than the actual, like, bloviating that I'm doing here. But I don't know. I want to put that out into the world.
How about, well, we're playing fantasy policy here for a second. It sounds like a no-brainer that HSI should break off and have its own identity and do its own thing. Like, there's no reason why they should be joined at the hip with a civil enforcement organization. Is that a straightforward enough proposition?
Something different should happen with HSI.
Something different. Okay, so set that aside. But for ERO, I mean, it sounds like it would be entirely reasonable, in addition to screening out the people who are like obviously white supremacists and obviously unqualified, wouldn't it be reasonable to say, all right, look, 99% of you have desk jobs. You're not going in hot pursuit of anybody. You don't need a gun. So we're taking away your guns. And you don't need a uniform. Your uniform is now going to be a short sleeve collared shirt.
They don't have uniforms. That's been part of the problem.
Well, you're not allowed to wear anything that even looks like a uniform, right? You can't. 99% of you are in the part of ICE that does not pursue people and does not need a gun. Like, you're never going out on the street.
Yeah, we're going to take existing ICE, 20% of your law enforcement officers, 80% are going to be case managers. And everybody that's a law enforcement officer now is going to have to reapply for those 20% jobs, right? Because there's so few of them.
Yeah.
I think we can all land on like, we need a new recipe and a new solution for immigration enforcement. And honestly, the ICE brand name is so trash.
Well, that's why Trump is changing it to NICE.
That'll work. Branding.
Nice. But I don't know, most people even at ICE would be open to like a new professional agency, right? That will allow them to do their work in a less politicized way. But so I think I agree. Like, we need a whole new concept at the end of the day. That isn't exactly anything we've done before.
You're just give them those things that the British people have. Like, don't they look at...
Yeah. A little nightstick. They don't even need a nightstick. You get a stapler.
Yeah, you get a stapler, Doug.
Thanks for melting down with us today. You can follow and subscribe to The Melting Pod wherever you get your podcasts. Our website is meltingpod.org, and you can find us on YouTube and Instagram. Drop us a line with any questions and let us know how we can improve the show. And you can check the show notes for organizations that are working hard to make our immigration system more sane and humane and that deserve your support. Until we melt again.